All right, we're going to talk some college football on the Our Lads Football Network, the OFN, today, as we welcome in an old guest, somebody that has talked college football with me years ago, and especially when we were doing audio shows for the Our Lads Football Network. Now we're doing video. We've been doing that for the past few years, and we welcome Mike Huguenin back to the Our Lads Football Network. Mike, good to talk to you again.
I appreciate you having me on, and not only am I an old guest,
we're all
I am
old, Mike. I hear you. I hear you.
Works both ways.
Now with On3. You weren't with On3 when you and I spoke years ago. So tell us a little bit about why you're with On3.
Yeah, we're about a year old. I work with Ivan Mazel and Matt Zenitz. We have a 3-man national team that covers the national scene. Actually, it's four people. Jesse Simonton's the other, but it's a heavy duty college football and recruiting site. It's started by the same guys who started Rivals and then 247, and this is their sort of crowning achievement, the cherry on the top. The recruiting database is phenomenal. We're really heavy into NIL. We have 4 writers devoted strictly to NIL because that is vastly important, both in terms of recruiting and in keeping your players in football and basketball. And one interesting aspect about NIL, the amount of money being given to female athletes. Some of the highest earning college athletes are women's basketball players and gymnasts.
That's not something you hear nationally too often.
No.
Yeah.
Right.
If at all.
No, it's sort of fascinating that's the way NIL is supposed to work. You become a star and you get well compensated for it, like the Cavender twins at Miami. A couple UConn basketball players, and gymnasts are just raking in the cash. That's, I think, one of the more interesting aspects.
Good for them, especially in those sports, because there's no, professional gymnast league to go to and to earn a lot of money, as opposed to, of course, a lot of the other leagues that mostly the men get to take advantage of when their college careers are over. So that's great. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a fascinating field as well. And if anybody follows college sports at all, you've come to realize how important NIL is. A lot of schools were behind the curve, and they are just now trying to catch up. But I think, as it is in basically everything, if you start off behind, it's sometimes extremely difficult to catch up. And I think there's going to be some athletic programs that are left behind and never get to where they should be.
I've never really gave this much thought, so maybe this is a silly question, but if and I know, well, of course, women's athletics, mostly if there's a professional league or a next step, it seems to be soccer or basketball. Is there any particular reason why, say, gymnastics couldn't kind of...
Social media followings. Like the gymnast, there's a gymnast at Auburn, Suni Lee, who won the gold medal in the Olympics. So she arrived as a freshman at Auburn with millions of social media followers. So, I'm an old guy, but I have a daughter in college. If you have a teenager around or a young 20-something kid, you realize how important social media is. TikTok, forget Facebook. That's old people stuff. TikTok is gigantic. Twitter, to an extent, is a big deal. But the social media followings, and you basically go to an athlete and say, if you advertise this on social media, you're going to make this much money. And yeah, it's a fantastic deal for athletes in every sport. But again, I think the fact that women athletes are being able to cash in, because you're right. I mean, NCAA talks about, most of our athletes go pro in something other than athletics. And that's the case for the vast, vast majority of women athletes.
All right, Mike, let's talk some college football. And a lot going on over the past couple of weeks. Who would have thought that Alabama would lose already a second time? So that's opened up doors. Clemson lost. That opens up door. Oregon losing. So I was really thinking about the way it's set up. And if let's just put this scenario that it's possible. Not probable, possible, that could we see 3 SEC teams in the playoffs if LSU beats Georgia and TCU loses.
I think that's possible. And I think the one reason it is possible, Tennessee won at LSU by 30 points, 44, well, 31 technically. I'm not good at math. But yes, Tennessee lost to Georgia, and yes, it was late in the season. But right now, yeah, if LSU were to win out, beat Georgia in the SEC title game, hard to see them not making the field. And then you realize, wait a second here, the LSU's lone loss in the league was to Tennessee, which blew their doors in Baton Rouge. So I think it's not likely, but yeah, the potential exists, just like I think the potential exists for 2 Big Ten and 2 SEC teams to make up the 14 playoff, because TCU is the only Big 12 school that can get in, and I would argue that USC is probably the only Pac-12 school that can get in, but USC needs a lot to happen above it for it to have.
How does the Big Ten, like, what's the scenario in which both Michigan and Ohio State get in?
Obviously, I think if they're both unbeaten when they play on the 27th, and if it's a close game, I think one aspect that hasn't been talked about enough, the Big Ten is not good. Penn State's the 3rd best team in the league.
Yeah.
Who's the 4th best? Because the Big Ten West is
not good.
Yeah, it's
no. The fact
good.
that Iowa's in the driver's seat to go back to the title game again is just mind-boggling.
Iowa, which gains 148 yards and beats Wisconsin by 14
it's not
points last week. So, and they obviously, if TCU finishes unbeaten, they're getting in. But right now, if you're a fan of Michigan or Ohio State, you want your teams obviously to both be unbeaten when they play. So if you're an Ohio State fan, you're cheering for Michigan. If you're a Michigan fan, you're cheering for Ohio State. Yes, you're clenching your teeth, but you're still doing it, and you're also hoping like heck that TCU loses a game. So potentially you could have an SEC, 2 SEC, including a team that didn't even win its division, and 2 Big Ten, including a team that didn't even win its division.
Could you give us a team that you think would be the one that would garner the most, outcry? Like, no, come on, you can't. No, that team's going to make it into the playoffs again if things fall the way they could fall with, let's say, I don't know about the LSU Georgia situation, but if TCU obviously loses. Can you give us a team that you think would be the biggest criticism?
I think the Tennessee is, if Tennessee's there, they're going to be 11-1 with a lot of really nice wins. If the loser of Michigan, Ohio State, if they get in at 11-1, you start looking to see who they've beaten. Michigan's beaten Penn State, and that's it, because their non-conference schedule was horrendous. The best team might have been Colorado State. If Ohio State goes 11-1, you're like, okay, they beat Toledo, which has won its division in the MAC. They beat Penn State, and they beat Notre Dame. So frankly, I think if Michigan were in at 11-1, I think that school would be the one that, come on here. But again, if TCU's got a loss, if the Pac-12 champ has 2 losses, there's a great chance that the Big Ten's getting to it.
Let's go through some of these conferences, and we start. I tell you what, we know what the deal is with the SEC, obviously. So I do have to ask you, as far as Tennessee and LSU, but I think I know the answer, but maybe I don't. Who do you think has the best chance of beating Georgia, or going further in the playoffs if they get an invite, LSU or Tennessee?
Tennessee. I think Tennessee is the better team. They did play in Baton Rouge, and they blew LSU's doors in. Tennessee's offense, yes, it had the blip against Georgia. I think there's a recency bias there, though. If Tennessee had played poorly and the Georgia game was the 3rd game, people would have put that in the rearview mirror and not even be worried about it. But because it was a November game, everybody's like, well, Tennessee's overrated. Well, they're not overrated. That offense is tremendous. Hendon Hooker might not be a great NFL prospect, but the kid is a phenomenal college quarterback. They have some good receivers. The defense is shaky, but you don't need a great defense to win anymore. You got to have a great offense, and that is an offense that can score points quickly and in high volume.
All right. The Big Ten. So we talked about that nutty race in the West. Who do you think is going to, when the smoke clears, who do you think is going to win the West?
Minnesota. Mo Ibrahim is a stud running back.
Yep.
Minnesota plays really good defense. They don't get the credit that Iowa gets and Illinois gets for playing a high level defense. They got a couple of key transfers on defense. They're a scrappy unit. Offensively, they got a big time offensive line. And Mo Ibrahim is a stud running back. And again, though, if every conference race is a sprint to the finish, the Big Ten West race is two turtles slowly getting there. Because it really is, watching Iowa, you marvel at their defense, you marvel at their special teams, and then you hide your eyes when they're going the field play offense. That is a horrendous offense. And given how stubborn Kirk Ferentz is, has said all season long, why are people upset? We won our division last year. And then you get your doors blown in the Big Ten title game. If they get to the Big Ten title game this year, it's going to be the same old thing. He doesn't ever seem to want to criticize his son, who's the offensive coordinator. Illinois had a great chance to win the division, but lost to Purdue last week, and Chase Brown gets hurt, which obviously puts a gigantic crimp in their offense. But, yeah, I think Minnesota is a team that can win the West. Again, I think Ibrahim is a legitimate star player, and the Minnesota defense isn't that far off from Illinois and Iowa's, and I think they got the better offense.
Yeah, and I believe so. Minnesota, they play Iowa this week at home, so if they beat Iowa and they win their final game, which is going to be at Wisconsin, which is not going to be easy, but easier than years past, they need at least one loss each from Illinois and Purdue, which is definitely possible. I guess Purdue is the easiest schedule, but last game of the season, they go to Indiana. That may not be that easy compared to the home game against Northwestern this week.
Yeah, and Purdue,
they're up and they're down. You can't figure them out.
You're right. That's want to believe in them. You're like, okay, Aiden O'Connell, oh my goodness, this kid's really good. Then you realize, he throws a ton of picks.
Yeah.
Charlie Jones having a phenomenal season, and he is. Defensively, though, they're up and down. The other Payne Durham's a stud tight end. The running game isn't always there, and Jeff Brom sort of gets up on the run too early at times. You're right. From a schedule standpoint, Purdue is got the easiest one, but I'm not. I've gone from being Purdue's going to win the division to Purdue is going to fritter this away, and I was right with the fritter part.
And Charlie Jones, there's an example right there. He's at Iowa. And he's like, nobody. He's like, who's this guy? And then he goes and he reunites with his I think it was his high school friend.
High school teammate. They don't call
And it's like, wow. I mean, all of a sudden he becomes like an actual NFL caliber sleeper receiver to keep an eye on. It's just amazing. So
right, and he is ill-suited to be a go-to receiver, but because of Purdue's situation, Milton Wright's been academically in that door for the whole season. So Jones is not the biggest guy.
No.
And he's taken gigantic punishment. He plays hurt every week, but he is the sort of poster child for here's what can happen when you go into the portal.
That's right.
You can go from being who is this guy to, oh my God, this guy's having a phenomenal season.
Yes. All right, ACC, speaking of the portal, because I do wonder, you tell me, do you think Tyler Van Dyke transfers?
I think it depends a heck of a lot on if Miami brings back Josh Gaddis as the offensive
coordinator. Really? I didn't realize that was a thing. Okay.
I think Josh Gaddis is a perfect example of a coach who doesn't always adjust to what he has on hand. Tyler Van Dyke, yes, Miami finished last season with a bunch of rummies, and Tyler Van Dyke put up great stats. But I also think that Rhett Lashley's offense took advantage of what Tyler Van Dyke can do best. Gaddis's offense does not. Last week, Ja'Carry Brown started for Miami, a true freshman, had a really solid game. He fits more in what Gaddis wants to do. I still think Tyler Van Dyke can play. And if Gaddis comes back, I don't know. If I'm Tyler Van Dyke,
no,
I don't want to play for Josh Gaddis.
I agree.
No.
Yeah, that's why. Now, where he goes, who knows? But a lot of teams, a lot of colleges would say, "Hey, come over here. We need you." Just look at Iowa. So
Yeah, but Kirk Ferentz is a guy who he hates the transfer portal.
Yeah.
I mean, he brought in one guy, and it's his third string tight end.
Yeah, that
So
ain't going to be the case. Yeah,
no,
that's
right.
not.
But I know what you mean.
Yeah,
There's a lot of teams out there who would say yes, Tyler Van Dyke reeked in 2021. I'm sorry, reeked in 2022, but he was a star in 2021. Our offense, we will get the Van Dyke 2021 version.
and North Carolina Clemson, so we know that championship game. Do you think North Carolina gives them a game? And
Yes.
what kind of a job has Mac Brown done? Especially he loses his quarterback, and everybody, all right, they're gonna have a down year. No down year. All of a sudden, Drake May might even be a better NFL prospect than Howell.
Yeah, Drake May leads the nation in total offense, averaging a tick short of 400 yards a game. And what the interesting aspect, he was known as a sort of a drop back passer in high school in the Charlotte area. He is a really effective runner, and he's a very willing runner. You don't see many 6'5", 230-pounders with big arms. Hey, I'm gonna tuck and run and not worry about it, but he does. Josh Downs is a stud receiver. They got a really nice receiving core. Yep. The offensive line has played a lot better than it did last year. Defensively, they are not good, which to me makes what Drake May has done even more impressive, because May and the offense know every week, you know something, if we don't score high 30s, low 40s, we ain't winning. Yeah. And he's exceedingly sharp. Clemson, obviously, miles better defensively than North Carolina, but Clemson's offense, man, that is a bad unit. I think people have come to realize that while DJ Uiagalelei looks like a stud quarterback, he is not.
Nope.
He's a adequate college quarterback. Would not be surprised to see him transfer in the offseason. I'm not sure all of his problems can be traced to the Clemson offense. I think it hurts him that they've changed coordinators in the offseason because Tony Elliott left for Virginia. But Uiagalelei, I think if you've watched them play the last 2 years, you've come to the realization that, yes, he's a big kid with a strong arm, but he's not anything close to being elite.
I haven't heard anything, but do you think Jeff Scott maybe returns to Clemson?
No, I don't think so. I think, Jeff Scott, man, that's, when USF hired him, that looked like the perfect hire. He had Florida ties. He was born in Florida. His dad coached at Florida State. He had great connections with Florida high school coaches because he recruited the state while he was at Clemson, and it was a just abject disaster. That is a horrendous team. There's no reason for USF to be that bad. I will say one thing, USF wants to build an on-campus stadium. Scott did a phenomenal job of fundraising. He was an old school, backslapping, schmoozing kind of coach, and I mean schmoozer in a good way. Yeah. He interacted well with boosters and with media and stuff. And I think a lot of folks were pulling for him, but you get blown out by Temple.
Yeah, I know.
That's not a good look, and then they sent him out the door the next 2 days later.
I know. I just I don't know what was going on. I'm not a full-time guy. I kind of wish they'd given it at least one more year. But, they know, hopefully they know more than I do about what direction they need to go in. All right, the Big 12, so we know TCU's in it. And I'm thinking it's going to be Kansas State, but it's like, talk about a Jekyll and Hyde team.
Yeah.
I mean, not just winning and losing, but they blow out these really good football teams like every other week, and then they lose these games at home that they're supposed to win. So I just get the kind of feeling that they're going to kind of right the ship now, and maybe we see K-State and TCU in the championship game.
Yeah, K-State, I mean, this and two really good coaching jobs. I mean, Sonny Dykes in his first year took over a program that didn't even go to a bowl last year. A lot of kids transferred out. He also did a great job in the portal, sort of under the radar. Their leading tackler is a transfer from Navy, linebacker Johnny Hodges, who went to Navy to play lacrosse.
Wow.
And then switched to football, which he'd also played in high school as a sophomore. Now he's TCU's leading tackler. Their second leading tackler is a transfer from Colorado, Mark Perry. So, and, Max Duggan, the quarterback's playing at a high level. Kendra Miller showed last week, if you didn't know who he was, I'm a really good running back. And he is a really good running back. You're right. K-State, Adrian Martinez gets hurt, and you're like, oh, they're going to go into the toilet. Nope, they haven't. Will Howard's played well. You look at what K-State puts on the field, and you're like, this team really isn't that good. But then they play well together. Chris Kleeman's a really good coach. Another team that's made phenomenal use of the portal. especially in their secondary. Their offensive line is an old school, we're going to beat you up offensive line. Deuce Vaughn is a big timer.
Oh
You know,
yeah.
he's like 5'6". The receiving core, nothing special, but they make plays when they need to. And again, I think it comes back to they rarely beat themselves. They don't turn the ball over. They don't commit that many penalties. They're a smart team, and they play well, big time complementary football. But from a talent standpoint, they're probably sixth or seventh in the league. They just play well together. Oklahoma's been a disappointment. Oklahoma State's been a disappointment. Texas is a perennial
Yeah.
disappointment. Baylor this year fell way back. It's a solid league top to bottom, because if your worst team is West Virginia or Iowa State, that's a really good bad team. The problem is, I'm not sure, outside of TCU, I don't think any school from any other league would be scared to play anybody
No.
in the Big 12.
By the way, do you think Neil Brown survives?
I think it was bad for Neil Brown that the West Virginia AD got
Yep.
fired Monday. So for whatever reason, it has not worked for him there. The last 2 years they played really good offensively and really poorly defensively. This year it's the opposite. That looked like a great fit. But no, I don't think Neil Brown is going to make it.
And by the way, TCU at Baylor this week, home against a really good Iowa State defense the final week when all the pressure might be on them potentially. Championship game, Big 12. I'm rooting for them. I just don't think they're going to make it.
Right, and the thing about TCU, I mean, you're right. They were mediocre at best the last 2 years. And last week they went into Texas while they were unbeaten. They also were the underdog. So the proverbial, they talked about chip on their shoulder, all that kind of stuff.
No respect.
Well, now it's flipped. The script is flipped in 1 week. Everybody now is out to get TCU, because you put if Baylor beats TCU, it turns a mediocre season into a good one. So TCU has gone from the hunter to the hunted, and you're right. Teams that aren't used to being in the spotlight sometimes can spit the bit down the stretch when they are in the spotlight. And man, it is shining bright now, because, like you said, if they win their last 3, they're in. They know it. Can they handle the pressure?
Pac-12 and UCLA, they were having such a good season, and then they let it all go downhill. I don't know that those last 4 passes by Robinson in the end zone. I was like, where's he throwing he had the guy wide open on 4th down, couldn't get the job done. Their chances are pretty much blown up. Utah all of a sudden is right in the race. Matter of fact, if Utah and Oregon win their final 2, they're both going to end up in the championship game unless USC beats UCLA. So there's still some potential, tiebreakers to keep an eye on. But what about USC and UCLA this week? Because again, USC in the title game if they win this week.
Yeah, fantastic game. I mean, it is unfortunate that it wasn't a 9-1 UCLA playing a 9-1 SC. The harkening back to in the 80s when both teams were nationally relevant. You got to give Chip Kelly credit for helping UCLA become relevant again. But you're right. If you're UCLA, you lose last week at home to a 3-6 Arizona team as a 19.5-point favorite. Your defense played maybe its worst game of the year. DTR did throw some bizarre passes, and I'm not sure they should have. I thought they should have relied even more heavily than they did on Zach Charbonnet. That kid is a stud running back. Their offensive line reconfigured through the portal. Their left tackle, Raekwon O'Neal, is a Rutgers transfer. They got a ton of transfers on defense. Last week, their defensive coordinator, Bill McGovern, missed the game. And the defensive play caller was one of their analysts, Clancy Pendergrast. And if you're a SC fan, you're like, of course, a defense led by Clancy Pendergrast fell short because he's not a good coordinator. So, but I mean, I think this week's game is fascinating. USC has had an extremely easy Pac-12 schedule. They've played one team. I don't know. They did lose to Utah. They've beaten up on a lot of bad teams. I think UCLA is going to move the ball easily on them. The flip side, I think SC is going to move the ball easily on UCLA. So I think we're going to have another Utah, USC, Oregon, UCLA game. Oregon Washington game where high 30s, low 40s, what it takes to win. And if I'm Chip Kelly, I'm telling Zach Charbonnet, Zach, you're going to
Yeah,
have
right.
35 touches. And if you're Lincoln Riley, you're telling Caleb Williams, okay, Travis dies out. You're throwing the ball 40 times and you're going to complete 30 of them because your secondary reeks. So I think this is going to be an extremely entertaining game. I just think it could last about 4 hours because they're going to be.
And that's a shame with Dye.
So, I think UCLA has a legit. I think UCLA can get the job done if Charbonnet has.
And if USC does clinch with a win, then maybe they still look at, hey, national championship hopes are alive, but the next week they would host Notre Dame. And that could spell who knows as far as, the national championship possibilities for USC could be kind of tenuous there. But then to Utah, Oregon, I just mentioned those two teams because they play each other this week at Oregon. Oregon, even if they win, still has to go to Oregon State the next week, but Utah gets Colorado. So really, this is one of those things where even if Oregon wins, I don't know, Oregon State hasn't lost at home. I mean, they lost that one game to USC, which went down to the wire. Otherwise, they've been very tough at home the last couple of years under the Jonathan Smith. But if Utah beats Oregon, it's over. Utah's going to end up in the championship game because they're not losing at Colorado.
Right, Colorado's like having a bye at the end of the season. You're right. Oregon State's a lot like Kansas State. You look at them and go, this team isn't very good, but they play extremely well together. The Martinez kid, Damian Martinez, is a really good freshman, highly underrated, and Jonathan Smith's a really good coach. You hear, will the bigger school want him? Obviously he's an Oregon State alum. He has a lot of ties there. He understands what it means. For Oregon State to be good. He also understands the limitations there. It's tough to recruit to Corvallis, even though technically, it is. It's closer to Portland than Eugene is, and I don't think people know that. He's just done a really nice job. They play well defensively, and you're right. That is an extremely difficult game for Oregon. Oregon's going to close the season with Washington, Utah, and Oregon State. That is a murderer's row at the end of the season. Bo Nix playing extremely well. Fascinating story. I mean, he was so up and down at Auburn. He's been extremely consistent since the opening game.
Transfer portal.
Dan Lanning. Yep, Dan Lanning deserves credit for right. They get blown out the first game, and you're like, oh my god. Then they hadn't lost again until last week when they lost to Washington. So the Pac-12 this year has been
it's better.
A lot of fun to watch. Pac-12 After Dark has been really good this year. They got high-level quarterback play. They throw the ball around. They have good receivers. There's a bunch of good running backs. And the defense isn't very good, but I'd much rather watch a 42-38 game than a 13.
And, what did you think when you saw – well, first of all, I don't know whether or not it was a timing issue, the reason why Nix was not in on that second to last series, whether it was they were still looking at him, there was no way he was going to be able to make it, or it was, we're not losing yet and I don't want to risk it. If that's the case, I think that's a bad way to do things, bad way to coach. If you were going to bring him in when you're down, you should have brought him in when it was tied. That's just the way I look at things. And then to go for it in that circumstance, there was no reason in the world to do that unless you are a pro-style team that gets under center and you want to give me a quarterback sneak for a couple of inches, I'm all right with that. But these wide open shotgun, I only need a half a yard and I'm going to line up in a shotgun is just ridiculous in that circumstance.
Well, I think I would have punted, and you do wonder about Nix. My presumption was he was still not. They were still checking out to make sure he could come back in the game because he is such a vital part of that offense. And you're right. If you go for it on fourth down, the play call. If Nix were in the game, it would have been a little bit different.
I think so too. So still unfortunate. It's just the way it is. That's why you can't leave it when you're a 2-touchdown favorite at home and you're killing everybody and Washington can't stop anybody on the road. You can't leave it up to a situation like that. In the independents out of the Power Five, Notre Dame. By the way, what kind of a job do you think year one replacing Brian Kelly? What do you think how do you think the coaching was at Notre Dame this year?
I think Marcus Freeman. I'm not sure he truly understood the microscope that he would be under. I think some of the stuff caught him a little bit off guard when they,
Yeah.
they lost to Marshall, which should never happen. And the vitriol after that game was, I think it caught him a little bit off guard. But they have gotten better as the season has progressed. They're playing with a backup quarterback. Their running game has been productive, but I'll be honest, I'm not sure they have a legit stud running back. It's more a group of guys that are I think just these guys are competent and adequate, but not really a star. Michael Mayer is a star at tight end. The offensive line is blowing people off, and the defensive line, which was expected to be really good, it has taken a while, but that is a pretty solid unit right now. I think overall, Marcus Freeman has done a B+ kind of job. The recruiting is going exceedingly well, but you still wonder about quarterback play, because I think if you watch college football, the teams that truly have a chance to win it all have elite difference makers at quarterback. And yes, some of them are 5-star guys like Caleb Williams. Some are transfers like Hendon Hooker, who was a 3-star guy out of high school. But Hooker has become an elite playmaker. Notre Dame does not have an elite playmaker at quarterback, and that's what they have to find.
Yeah, Kyle Kelly, who has been on our channel covering Notre Dame football, said that, because we talked about the quarterback position, said that there's this hope because Tommy Rees has this opportunity to go after this really, I think it's a 5-star recruit that he's angling for. More than I do. But other than that, there's definitely a lot of people in Notre Dame that are not very happy with the fact that how can we not find a quarterback at Notre Dame?
Notre Dame, right? Brian Kelly, the dude's a great coach. I mean, look what he's done at LSU. And I'm not sure he ever really truly had an elite quarterback at Notre Dame either. They turned Ian Book into a guy who was highly functional, but I'm pretty sure that Kelly knows I can get a stud quarterback at LSU a hell of a lot easier than I can at Notre Dame. So, heck, if Jaden Daniels were at Notre Dame, I think he'd have pretty good numbers as well. So, but Notre Dame has to ramp up its quarterback recruiting. And talking to guys who cover recruiting for us, sometimes they lock in on one guy and realize, oh my God, he's not coming here.
That's been a problem. Yes.
So, right. So, but I still think Marcus Freeman has done a pretty good job. I mean, he's a first-time head coach, and he's not a first-time head coach at Indiana or Mizzou or Miami of Ohio. He's the first-time head coach at Notre Dame. So the pressure has been there. I think he has weathered the storm. Though all that said, if they lose to SC, a lot of his fan base is going to be ticked off.
But at least they did get the Clemson win, which was important. No question.
Which was, and they also beat North Carolina. So they're the best team in the ACC.
Should Jim Mora get head coach of the year votes, or should he just win it?
Deserves a lot of plaudits for getting UConn to bowl eligibility. Mike Elko at Duke has Duke at 7-3. They were disastrously bad last year. And Brian Kelly, another first-year coach, has done a great job. Consider I don't know what's the right word I want to lose. It's, that program in turmoil. Ed Orgeron left LSU in not a good place. Kelly comes in, tries to do some stuff. He looked dumb on social media with some of the stuff he tried to do, but he has got a veteran staff. He knows what he's doing. They lost their first game. I think people, you should have, I'm sure you went online and you had LSU fans going, this guy's a clown, get him out of here. And then he wins the SEC West in his first season with frankly a patchwork roster. He's got true freshmen starting at tackle. He's got a transfer guard from FIU. The quarterback from Arizona State's had a really good year. He lost his best defensive player in the opener, Mason Smith, who was that kid's got big time first round NFL potential. His secondary is basically all transfers.
Boute's had a head scratching season. Everybody thought he was going to be a top 10 draft pick. I know he had a child and all, but everybody's wondering what happened there. Butte, the wide
I'm
receiver.
sorry, which player? Oh yeah, and I think it. Plus, I think it takes a while for
Yeah,
players to adjust to
yeah,
coaches and vice versa. And I know, Kelly was there for spring practice. It's 15 practices, and if you're a first year coach,
yeah,
you're still
yeah.
learning some of the dudes' names for God's sake. So I think it took a while for. Also, I think it took a
It
while for
did.
Jaden Daniels to get acclimated with his receiving core. Their running backs have been a patchwork all season because they counted heavily on Emory. He missed 5 games. Heck, they're starting a former walk-on who's a really good player at running back, but it took a while for everything to gel. But again, if you would have told LSU fans before the season you're going to win the SEC West and
Yeah.
beat Saban, they would have erected a statue to Kelly before the season.
And the kid
began.
Perkins, the freshman linebacker, is maybe freshman of the year. So him and Judkins to.
Winshawn Judkins, yeah, especially Perkins. Everybody knew how good he was. I think Judkins has surprised a few people, especially Ole Miss brings in Zach Evans, and
That's right,
Judkins
yeah.
has played better. He's had a phenomenal season. I mean, really is. And you saw last week, I believe, or maybe the week before, Kiffin was talking about, there's a lot of rumors about other teams reaching out to Judkins. We can get you a better NIL deal if you leave. So that's the way of the world.
I don't know how the fans felt, but watching that game, the end of the game last week, and the second to last drive, and they're in position, and the last 3 downs, Judkins doesn't get a touch. They get down there. Judkins makes a big play. They get down there inside whatever the 20. 4 straight downs, Judkins doesn't get a touch.
And Judkins, Ole Miss is a running team. And I think that's people look, it's Kiffin, he loves to throw it. Well, they ran the hell out of the ball last year. They're even a better running team this year. Part of that, Jackson Dart's not anything close to being an elite passer. Interesting thing, he and Slovis have combined for 20 TD passes.
USC.
They went to USC. Yeah. They're a little bit overrated. But the Ole Miss play calling last week was, at the end, Charlie Weiss Jr., I think, went away. Maybe they got worried about the clock or something, but you're right. I mean, you are a running team. You have a stud running back. He's made 2 huge plays in that drive.
Yeah, it's tough. And they had 2 quarterback draws. So it's okay. So AAC, just want to quickly run through these. And it looks like Central Florida will get home field as long as they win their final 2, and their opponent's not very tough. So they should get that. Tulane, Cincinnati, final game of the regular season for both teams. It looks like the winner of that game could end up in the championship game.
Right, and UCF's beating them both. UCF, another school that went to the portal to get its quarterback, John Rice Plumlee, a guy who Lane Kiffin thought so highly about as a quarterback that he moved him to wide receiver. And then Gus Malzahn goes on, gets him, realizes this guy, no, he can't throw. I don't care. I like running quarterbacks. And then Plumlee had a phenomenal game last week against Tulane. And UCF defensively is a physical unit. Their leading tackler is a kid who came in from Eastern Illinois, Jason Johnson. Travis Williams, a former Auburn assistant, is their defensive coordinator. They have a ton of speed, a bunch of dudes from Florida all over that defense, and you expect Florida speed, and they are. And Tulane's a phenomenal story. Willie Fritz has done a great job as coach. The Spears kid's a really good running back. And you look at last week's game, Spears, I believe, only had 8 carries. And I thought the play calling for Tulane was a little bit suspect. And Cincinnati, you got to give Fickle credit. Lost so much talent off that team. I think it was 9 draft picks. They're still in the hunt for the AAC title, still in the hunt for a New Year's Six game. It's a good program now, and that's a good program that's heading into the Big 12 next year. But Cincinnati, to me, comes in ready to contend for an upper division finish in the Big 12 next year. And if things go better, they could be.
Yeah, I just like to, just because I like to see things a little different. I would like to see Tulane beat Cincinnati and then face Central Florida. And again, even though they played together already, but still, that was an incredible. I don't think anybody expected the outcome because even early on, what was it like a 4-score deficit early on for Tulane, I believe, until they made a run, and they still had a chance early fourth quarter, but just couldn't get the job done. But Cincinnati did have to go to Central Florida to win that game. So maybe, and that would be at Central Florida again, though. So it's no neutral field situation. I
Yes.
just kind of would not like to see that kind of repeat, to see after Central Florida have to beat Cincinnati a second time. That's never easy. Plus, again, I enjoy the Willie Fritz story. I think that's a great thing going on at Tulane. And speaking of a couple of those, because we brushed by Hugh Freeze. So Hugh Freeze, Gus Malzahn. Do you think they'll both be back at both of their schools, Liberty and Central Florida, next season?
I think Malzahn will for sure, because they're going into the Big 12. UCF's got a lot of money involved in their football future. They got a lot of. I live in Orlando and read a lot about them. Sometimes I read too much about them, but they have a legitimate plan of action. And Malzahn is getting what he wants in terms of infrastructure. Hugh Freeze just signed a contract extension. That would not keep him there if another school wants him. Though, they talk about coaches bringing baggage with them. He's bringing a factory with him, a suitcase factory of baggage. Forget the personal issues with Hugh Freeze. Ole Miss was on probation because he cheated in recruiting. So, yes, winning trumps all. But there are more than a few ADs who will not hire Hugh Freeze. Though I think if he gets a Power 5 offer, he's leaving because Liberty's an independent this year. They moved to Conference USA next year.
Yeah.
Big deal. Hugh Freeze wants to be back in the Power 5.
Conference USA. That's as low as it gets, unless you're a MAC.
Right, and we wrote a story last year when all the conference movement was going on, and we talked to some people in the both TV industry and the athletic industry who at the time said we don't foresee Liberty getting into a league because of the controversy surrounding the school. And then a couple weeks later, Conference USA invites them in because I think Conference USA was realizing we really can't be choosy here. We need a football program that's solid. The basketball program has been good in the Big South. They're really good in baseball, and they got a good softball team. It's a nice athletic program overall. So I think Conference USA sort of gritted its teeth and said, come on. So it is – there's a lot of folks out there who don't like Liberty. But the Conference USA folks are not.
The Sun Belt Conference has done an amazing job over the last few seasons. They were at the end of the barrel in Division I FBS football just a few years ago. Every year they get better and better. Now they're basically I don't even know if they're behind the Mountain West Conference anymore. That's how strong the SBC's been. Coastal Carolina, what a tremendous job Jamie Shadwell's done. I wonder if Grayson McCall comes back. I wonder if Shadwell, unless he gets a tremendous offer, I wonder if he goes, all right, another year until I get I could wait another year until I get the better offer because I love McCall. I think McCall is going to be a really good pro. But if McCall comes out this year, I wonder if Shadwell gets an offer that he goes, you know what? Okay, maybe my time's right. What do you think about Caldwell at a Power 5 school?
Shadwell isn't as hot a commodity as you would think he would be. He used to coach at Charleston Southern. They got put on NCAA probation. Okay. They played illegal players. That wasn't directly because of him, but he is tainted. He has interviewed a few places. He's an acquired taste for some ADs. Let's put it that way. His offense, though, oh my goodness, it's so fun to watch. If you can take watching games on that ugly field. I don't just what's wrong with green fields? But anyway, it's a extremely innovative offense. They throw the ball well. They run the ball well. He recruits well. He develops well. Basically, everything you want in a coach, he brings it. So, you think you'd hear him maybe, can he make the move to Auburn? His name hasn't come up. I think it's more likely that if he wants to leave Coastal, he's going to another group of
Why
five
would you do
school, but
that? Yeah.
was that what he wants?
Yeah.
So I don't know. So, but that league has done a good job embracing its regionality. Embracing old school, old time rivalries. There's a lot of rivalries in that league that were, back in the 80s and 90s. These teams
Okay.
were 1AA teams that played a lot. So the older fans remember that. And they also have a bunch of good young coaches. Troy, John Summerall, in his first season has done a phenomenal job. Second season, Kane Womack at South Alabama, whose dad was a longtime college assistant, has done a great job. And these schools also realize we could get second-tier recruits from our own states, and we're going to beat a lot of teams with these second-tier guys because there's a hell of a lot of players in Alabama, Georgia. North Carolina is better than people think when it comes to recruiting. Mississippi with Southern Miss. It is really a good league, and it's a league unlike others, Dave. Instead of like we're looking to expand on a big scale, they've looked to expand on a regional scale, and it's paid off because you can drive to most games, road games in your league, and that's a gigantic plus for fans and especially for students.
Coastal Carolina will face, looks like, South Alabama or Troy. Troy has the tiebreaker beating South Alabama, so if they both win out, Troy will end up taking on Coastal Carolina. And hopefully by then, Grayson McCall will be ready to return.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's fun to watch.
And by the way, whoever wins the Sun Belt, I don't know what they're tied into, but this is the thing I just despise about the bowls. I hate it when these really interesting, like Sun Belt champion team has to play the third place team from the Conference USA in a bowl game. It's like, what? Where did he come up with these? I don't like those predetermined matchups. I'd like there to be a little bit of wiggle room so you can get these really special story season teams, get them to play. If you want to play a third place team, we'll play a third place team from the Big Ten or something like that. Gives us fans something to watch and get excited about.
Yeah, there is a tie-in in the Birmingham Bowl, but I think it's an AAC team against like SEC number 10. Yeah. And you're right. I mean, who cares? But there is ESPN owns, obviously, they own a number of smaller bowls, and they have in the last couple of years made them a little bit more open-ended, just for the reason you said. It would be nice to see the Sun Belt champ play
absolutely
the match.
Yes.
Or number 2 in the Sun Belt playing number 1 in Conference USA or something of that nature. I'd love to see UTSA.
There you go.
I think is going to win Conference USA. Play Coastal Carolina or Troy.
Yep.
That'd be
because last year wasn't it Lafayette and the tremendous season they had played Marshall?
Yeah,
I mean, come on. I mean, there was a tremendous story from Lafayette, and you're playing Marshall. Conference USA. You mentioned UTSA. Okay, so you talk about a head coach that's done a tremendous job. Are we looking at a potential Power 5 candidate here?
Yes, Jeff Traylor. I think his name came up a little bit last year at Texas Tech. I think Texas Tech knew all along they were going to hire McGuire. So Traylor got the extension and the raise at UTSA. But I think UTSA officials realize that he is not long for their campus. He is a future Big 12 coach in waiting. He has tremendous amount of Texas ties. Former Texas high school coach, was an assistant at Texas. And the dude's done a phenomenal job at UTSA. Frank Harris is a really good quarterback. They got 3 wide receivers who I think will get NFL. If they're not drafted on third day, they're going to get NFL looks. I mean, 3 on 1
Well, I know about Franklin. Who are the other 2?
In Conference USA. Franklin, Sakari.
Oh, okay.
Cephas.
Yes. And okay.
Can't remember the other one. I should know that. But that's, again, he realized, sort of like the Sun Belt coaches did, I can get second and even third tier type recruits in Texas and turn them into big time players. Maybe I sign a lineman who's 6'6", 260, and by the time he leaves here, he's 6'6", 320. Because I think Spencer Burford fit that, and I believe I don't know if he's starting in the NFL, but he's playing in the NFL at tackle. So that's another program that finds gems and develops them into high
Well,
level
if he
college
hangs
players.
on like another year, maybe the Texas job will open up again.
Yeah, Texas every year people want to believe, sort of like Miami. It's given the advantages those schools have in recruiting, you think they'd be better. And Texas
Yes.
has every advantage
Yes.
known to mankind in the Big 12. And they're going to have every advantage known to mankind
Yeah.
when they move to the SEC too. The problem is they don't win games. It's almost like at times you're like, Texas is going to make a mistake in
Yeah.
this game, and yep, there it is.
It's one thing to recruit, but you have to be
invariably
able to, once you get to those big moments or those big games, you got to coach.
right. And I think Sarkisian knows what he's doing. But it is, Bijan Robinson's gone after this year. Quinn Ewers looked good earlier in the year. He was brutal against TCU. They have talent on that team. Sark's only in his second year. So there'll be a lot of heat next year for him because they're recruiting well. But yeah, for whatever reason, Texas has won one national title in the last 54 years. Inexcusable is the word.
As well see if Mac Brown's interested.
Yeah, he can go back. But yeah, Miami's another school that, there's a reason Cristobal's there because the previous regime did not do a very good job on or off the field. But for Miami to be this bad, for Miami, especially Miami,
it's
the recruiting hotbed of the nation. If you watch them play against Middle Tennessee State, you saw Middle Tennessee State receivers run by Miami DBs. You saw Duke players do the same. That program is, if Texas is, you want to hide your eyes, Miami, you want to hide your eyes and put the TV under the dirt.
They just got it so wrong for so long with the coaching decisions. Now I'm completely willing to give Cristobal a red shirt because he's earned it. And once he recruits his players and his coaching next season, though, they have to see marketable improvement. And I think they will. I have confidence in it.
Yes. Market improvement. Yeah. And he is recruiting well. They have a very aggressive NIL program. They're bringing in some good players. But yeah, if you watch them this year, man, they got a long way to go on the offensive line. And again, the secondary. If there were one place where Miami
on paper,
should be good every single season, it's defense.
And then, by the way, North Texas, even though they lost to UAB last week, can still clinch if they beat Rice in 2 weeks. They're off this week, so if they beat Rice in 2 weeks at home, they will play UTSA, which should be a good matchup because the first one, this one is also at UTSA. But hey, there was a pretty decent matchup the first time around. And good to see Seth Luttrell getting the program back again because wasn't he the hottest name like about 4 or 5 years ago?
He was hot. You're right. And then sort of faded, and then now he's going to uptick again. Austin Owen, the quarterback, I believe he's 29 or 30. He played minor league baseball for a while. But yeah, Luttrell's has done a nice job, and their defensive coordinator is Phil Bennett, who's been around forever.
SMU
He's
coach.
Done a pretty good job as well. They lost arguably. Well, they lost 2 of their 3 best defensive players. Transferred to the Murphy twins. Transferred to UCLA. Those are 2 really high level edge rushers, but they've weathered the storm, and that's a nice season.
And by the way, I do think Rice has the right guy in Bloomgren. They're getting there. Because they were really bad when he took over, and I think that was. By the way, speaking of Stanford, I should have asked you this. Speaking of Stanford coaches, David Shaw, you think however long he wants to coach, he's going to coach? Is that the way Stanford is with their football program, or do you think that they're getting a little bit, impatient with what's going on there?
I think last year at this time, if you'd asked me that question, I'd say, yeah, he's there for as long as he wants to be. Okay. I think it has changed. I think the Stanford athletic program as a whole, though, there are some hidebound traditionalists there. NIL, it's not good. Transfer portal is not good. And then you have others who realize maybe it's not good, but hey, that's where we're at now. We need to adjust. And it's a slow-moving group at Stanford. Shaw is not happy with the way college football is these days. So maybe that is an impetus for him to like, something, I'm done with this. Oh, at the least, if he does come back, and I think he will, but you hope he makes some staff changes because I'm a firm believer that coaches like bread on his grocery store shelf can go stale. And I think the Stanford program has grown stale. I think they need some new blood, some new ways of thinking. Tanner McKee, if you watch him play, that kid's
Absolutely.
got some
First round
moxie
potential.
and talent.
Yes.
And then you watch him play in that offense, and you're like, goodness gracious.
It's unfortunate. Yep. And it's unfortunate that Emmitt Smith's son got hurt because he was the only thing that they had going for him besides McKee. In the MAC, as we close it out, Toledo, they've had another fine season, and they're in the West. They're clinched already from the West. So it's up to the East in Ohio. Yes, even though Solich left out of nowhere, Ohio's been steadily kind of regrouping, and they're in the driver's seat. They win the last 2 games. They win the East.
Yeah. Yeah, and Ohio last year, right, Solich retired in June or July of 2021, and they were horrendous last year, to the point where his hand-picked successor, Tim Albin, who had been his longtime right-hand man, going into the season was on the hot seat. They started off poorly, but they've played well of late. Curtis Rourke, their quarterback, the only starting quarterback in the FBS ranks, who's Canadian, by the way, is playing really good football. And Ohio is a team known for its running game, but they are throwing the heck out of the ball. They play pretty solid defense. And Toledo, Jason Candle has gone from being, he's sort of like Jeff Luttrell. He was a hot commodity, then it sort of cooled off, and now he's back on the uptick. He's done a nice job. They got some key transfers, even though they lost a couple guys. Like Isaiah Winstead, who's East Carolina's probably his second best receiver, is a Toledo transfer. But Toledo, the MAC is not a good league. It's the worst of the leagues. But Toledo can play, despite the fact that they gave up 77 to Ohio State. It's a solid MAC program, and Ohio's had a surprisingly good season. And so has Buffalo.
Yes.
With Maurice Linguist in his second year as the coach. So Linguist is a former SEC assistant. He's brought some different kinds of. He's a very aggressive recruiter, and that's one thing that the MAC doesn't have a lot of. So it's interesting to see that. And Buffalo. You look around the country, there's a lot of key Buffalo transfers playing elsewhere. Kansas's leading tackler is a Buffalo transfer. Kansas' center is a Buffalo transfer. Baylor center Jacob Gall was an all Big 12 guy, Buffalo transfer. So
Leipold knows what he's doing, doesn't he?
Yes, he did. And I think Linguist has kept it going. He's done a good job. And Kyle Vantrease, the Georgia Southern quarterback, is another. I think he's second in the nation in passing yards, another Buffalo transfer. So, Leopold identified good talent, and Linguist
and by the way, if those two quarterbacks, Rourke and Finn, play each other in the championship game, they're both sophomores, I believe. In this day and age, we just talked about it, how many really good Power 5 schools can use quarterbacks. So, I'm not saying that they're elite level players, but you put O'Rourke or Finn at Iowa, and they're a lot better. I'll tell you that right now. Because of the offense.
Not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure because I think the offense drags them down. That is going to be I wrote something earlier this year because Dabo and Ferentz probably are the two coaches who have been most vocal against the portal. If you watch Iowa play on a weekly basis, you're like, they could have had. Why didn't they go into the portal and bring in 8 or 9 guys on offense alone? And if you're Clemson, are you telling me that you couldn't have gone and got a receiver or two who wouldn't have helped you this year? And both those coaches talk ad nauseum about culture. Culture is important, but if your culture is that good, bringing in 1 or 2 new guys, is it really going to mess it up? And that's what it's. Let's get serious here. It's time for those guys to adapt to the new age.
Mike, we could do this, or I could do this for 10 hours with you, especially since we haven't spoken in a few years, and I've taken enough of your time, and I do appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get the opportunity to do it again before it's all said and done, because even though it's gone by, as always, really fast, we're already almost in Thanksgiving, and the championship games, or the de facto championship games, the Michigan-Ohio State games. So, and really, it all starts next week, with the USC and UCLA. So it's already here, but there's still a lot of good football ahead of us, not just the bowl games, but the playoffs and so forth. And I look forward to getting the opportunity to speak to you again when it's all said and done. Meanwhile, do you have your own weekly podcast at On3? Or are you just basically floating guest?
I don't know. We have a bunch of guys who do podcasts, including a guy named JD Piquel who has Ivan Mazel on once a week on his show. But yeah, if your listeners are recruiting fans, especially, I mean, I've followed recruiting for, man, I can remember when Sammy Smith was a high school recruit back in the 80s, and I actually broke the news he was going to sign with FSU when I was on the school paper in Florida. But the recruiting database at On3 is much better than anybody else's, and I'm not just saying that because I work here. So much more info, and the NIL aspect of our coverage makes everything different.
It's got your juices flowing. It was enough to get you moving to On3. And yes. I'm sure they're real happy to have you. And Mike, I was happy to have you back here on our channel to help us talk about all these big conference championships that are coming up soon and the playoffs and so forth. So again, I look forward to getting the opportunity to talk to you again before it's all said and done this season. Thanks,
Excellent.
Mike.
I really enjoyed